I, like many, love everything that the Disney parks, and Disneyland specifically, embodies. Both the rides themselves and the history of the park as a whole has fascinated me ever since I was a kid. One of my favorite parts about the park is how all these different tones meld together to create one experience. From bright and bouncy rides based on movies to wholly original, eerie, and macabre attractions. And when you're talking about strange rides in Disneyland, the first one that comes to mind for me might surprise you. That is Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and the mechanics are not what makes it unique. It's very similar to Snow White's Scary Adventure in both aesthetic and design. It's not even the fact that the ride ends with you going to hell, which is, albeit, also strange. It is the fact that every time I've waited in that line for a glorious trip through Toad Hall, and hell, I hear the same thing. What even is Mr. Toad from? Well, my fellow line dwellers, allow me to introduce you to the most underrated Disney gem. The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad is the last film in the wartime or package era of Disney films, often regarded as the least memorable and possibly the worst era of Disney. While I say that Ichabod and Mr. Toad is underrated, it's still probably the most well-known film of the era besides maybe Saludos Amigos. Of course, you have the Mr. Toad ride, and I'm sure everyone has at least seen clips from the Sleepy Hollow segment. But the thing is, if you're not a hardcore Disney fan / animation history nerd like myself, there's absolutely no need to see a film like Fun and Fancy Free, unless you really want to get creeped out. Ichabod and Mr. Toad, on the other hand, is a film that everyone can love, and it really bums me out that it's not included in the same discussions as other Disney classics from the time, such as Cinderella. So we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to make you love it. Or else. The film is split into two stories, one being The Wind in the Willows, and the other being The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Now, Sleepy Hollow is admittedly the superior segment and gets all the press, which is kind of unfair. Sleepy Hollow is so good that it makes people think that the Mr. Toad segment is irrelevant. Which sucks, because this segment has all the makings of a classic Disney short. Beautiful animation, even on a reduced budget, memorable music and characters, not to mention great comedic moments at the height of cartoon slapstick. Not surprising since one of the animation directors, Jack Kinney, would go on to direct this classic. I also really enjoy the characters and kind of wish they were used more in other Disney media. Ratty and Molly are super charming and have a really delightful British wit to them. Toad's enthusiasm is super infectious, and Cyril Proudbottom is my pick for best animated horse sidekick. But really, the segment just has such a wonderful, breezy tone to it. Literally, you can almost feel the cool, pleasant breeze as these characters have these beautiful interactions. And yeah, that is a super pretentious thing to say, but no one could create moments like these quite like Disney in the 1930s and 40s. If you want evidence of their ability to create beauty out of literally anything, I'll direct you to a little film called Fantasia. The icing on the cake is Basil Rathbone as the narrator. Much like Sebastian Cabot's narration in Winnie the Pooh, I could listen to Rathbone for hours. Once again, he really adds to the charm and subtle British humor and moments the film is trying to create, which I think is important as the main idea of the film as a whole is to present two famous stories that encapsulates their respective countries of origin. So there you go, The Wind in the Willows is awesome. I definitively proved it, so stop saying it's bad, even though it is absolute crap compared to Sleepy Hollow. The Disney version of Sleepy Hollow is not only one of my favorite pieces of animation, not only one of my favorite pieces of film, but just one of my favorite things, period. I absolutely love when Disney gets dark and spooky. I pretty much base my whole life around the Haunted Mansion. This short has everything I want all rolled into one. Beautiful animation, ghost stories, catchy songs, and most importantly, an atmosphere drenched in the Halloween spirit. I have a lot of Halloween traditions that I'm pretty obsessive about, but none so important as watching this movie every October, as well as blasting the Headless Horseman song every chance I get. Being a big horror fan, I love scary stories that also have an element of fun to them. Stuff like Evil Dead 2 or Fright Night do that really well. However, nothing does it better than this cartoon. It does so by taking everything wonderful about Halloween in a New England fall and puts it up on screen. Before we talk about the chase scene, which is the obvious highlight, I want to mention the preceding 20 minutes. I find the first two acts of Sleepy Hollow fascinating. Nothing really happens, and unlike The Wind in the Willows, there's not really any dialogue outside of Bing Crosby's narration. Some might say it's boring, but it's actually due to that fact that the short works. It's less focused on dialogue and character, instead focused on the artistry and mood. The ending chase wouldn't have near the impact if you didn't have all the time to soak up that atmosphere. You learn what you need to about the characters, and then you see how they all interact. Simple, but effective. But it's when we get to the Halloween party where the film moves into legendary status for me. You want to talk about atmosphere and tone? Just look at this. I don't think I've ever more wanted to just reach through the screen and live in a film. And even though the characters get little in the way of development, you're still invested in their stories. Ichabod, Brom Bones, and even Katrina, who bears a striking resemblance to someone you might know, are all engaging. Then of course you get to the most underrated Halloween song of all time, as well as a shot that used to freak me out as a kid. Like, seriously, nothing analytical here, but just why is this shot so scary? What is this? It's freaking me out right now. And then we get to perhaps the greatest ending to any ghost story. Now, I must mention that I'm a huge fan of the original story by Washington Irving, and would you believe this version is probably the most accurate to the original? While others try CG witches and gun-wielding horsemen, the Disney version knows to keep it simple. And honestly, to this day, the sequence is super nerve-wracking. Just the patience of this scene, as well as the iconic music and sound effects build an atmosphere of ultimate dread. Then after that, we get the greatest laugh in cinema history. And then we're off. Honestly, I don't really know if I can say anything about this scene that hasn't been said. It is iconic. It's a heart-stopping race with beautiful compositions and moments that would scar children for decades. And then after all this build-up, after all this tension, we get a masterful use of a really abrupt ending.
Next morning, Ichabod's hat was found. And close beside it, a shattered pumpkin. But there was no trace of the schoolmaster.
I don't know what it is. I know it's a fun and cheesy Disney cartoon, but that moment always sticks with me and gives me goosebumps. Honestly, like I said, the whole finale speaks for itself. No way I could do it justice. You just gotta see it. At only an hour and 8 minutes, there is no excuse for skipping this flick. If you're in the mood for some classic Disney but think you've seen all the masterpieces, think again. Take a trip to this weird, creepy library and discover the adventures of the fabulous Ichabod and Mr. Toad.